Oh boy, setting this up can be a bit of work. Guru, did you find it?
No,
Go to
Got
video.
it.
I can't see a lot of options though for video.
Actually, nobody complained per se. Everyone selected HD. We're good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome everyone. This is the second episode of the India Dialogue. We're so excited that you're still here and you're willing to give us a listen. My name is Ruchir. I'm joined by Guru Prakash Paswan, an author, a champion of Dalit rights, and a spokesperson for the BJP. Mitali Mukherjee, besides being a director of journalism at the Reuters Institute, she is well known for her work at CNBC. Manu Raj Shanmugan Sundaram, or Manu, is not only a successful advocate with his own law practice, but he is also a spokesperson for DMK. And I think I'm an organization builder. I'm the CEO at Distributed Energy, and I'm a chair at the School of Policy and Governance. We know each other from our time at Australia India Youth Dialogue. Some of us know each other better than others. We're doing this because we care about India and want to discuss issues in a way that adds value. We're all friends and want to discuss important issues in India, sensitive or not, friendly disagreements or not, without having to shout at each other or live in slogans. For now, this is an experiment that we want to run in the build-up to the 2024 national elections. Maybe we continue after, maybe we stop, but we want to give this a shot and help unpack important issues for India. Today, the first topic, Guru will lead us there. Guru?
thank you so much, Ruchir. It's truly a pleasure and a privilege to be participating in this second edition of the India podcast. And a lot has been up recently back home. And the most interesting thing is that the committee which was constituted recently on exploring the contours, on exploring the mechanisms for one nation, one election, or commonly known as simultaneous election, has been doing the rounds. So the idea has been in discussion since the inception. Even in the Constituent Assembly debates, it was conceived and discussed by Professor Shibanlal Saxena, and it was sort of deliberated that how and when the election cycles break and how will that lead to policy paralysis as well. So very interestingly, he observed, and I would like to quote that it is Professor Shibanlal Saxena in one of the Constituent Assembly debates. He said that our constitution provides for the dissolution of legislature when a vote of no confidence is passed. So it is quite possible that election to the various legislatures in the provinces and the center will not be concurrent. If it's not concurrent, it will happen every now and then. So what is going to be the shape of our policy making? So this has been the concern since the onset of our journey as a nation. Time passed and we saw Parliamentary Standing Committee on Personal Public Grievances, Law and Justice, which was chaired by a Congress Member of Parliament, Dr. E.M. Sudarshan Nachiyappan, who submitted the report. The report was titled Feasibility of Holding Simultaneous Elections to the House of People, that is the Lok Sabha, and the state legislative assemblies. And in a crux, it can be said that the observation of this committee was that a solution will be found to reduce the frequency of election, which relieve people and government machinery tired of frequent electoral processes. Similarly, observations were also made on the cost that is incurred on model code of conduct. And after that, we had the 107th report of the Law Commission, which also said that the rule ought to be one election once in 5 years for the Lok Sabha and the legislative assemblies. It was supported by the former President of India, Pranab Mukherjee, who, while endorsing the idea, said that this is an idea the political leadership should think of. If political parties collectively think, we can change it. The Election Commission can also put in their idea and efforts on holding the polls together. That will be highly beneficial. For the last few years, we are seeing Honorable Prime Minister actively sort of encouraging conversation on this idea. And recently, a committee was constituted in this regard as well. That committee asked for suggestions from the public, and around 75,000 suggestions or inputs have come, and the idea, the deliberation has started. So it's very important constitutional electoral issue that has gone to the public, and something which we all look forward to. I think if Manu recently wrote an article on this for the national newspaper Hindu, so I would invite Manu to sort of enlighten us with his thoughts on this.
Thank you, Guru. I think you've done a great job setting the scene. And as you rightly said, 2 points. One is that it's almost Republic Day, right? And the essence of the Republic. And I think that is one point where Guru and I would be in complete and total agreement with each other, is that we are a constitutional democracy, meaning we moved away from the British Dominion status and we set up our own constitutional document or a constitutional foundation. Now, by extension of that argument, the democratic setup envisaged a 5-year term for each government. Now, of course, from the first elections in 1951 onwards, all the states and the union went to election at the same time. Now, as you know, democracy is often chaotic. Governments fell, governments could not complete their tenures. So therefore, fresh elections had to be called mid-term of the union's tenure. And as a result, there were even a few union governments which did not complete their entire tenure. So as a result, we have now multiple cycles. So within a 5-year term, you may have multiple election cycles. So one of the big proponents or motivation for bringing in a one nation, one election, which is just a fancy way of saying simultaneous elections, is that we will have one election cycle every 5 years. So why do we need that? People say it will reduce cost. It will also reduce what they call governance downtime. So each time there's an election, as you know, there is a model code of conduct which says what political parties, governments can do, but more importantly, cannot do. So this will be reduced. On the other side, and I'm firmly on the other side on this one, I believe this will impact into the basic existence of many governments. Now, if let us say we draw the line on 2024 or 2026, then all the governments which do not come into this cycle must necessarily be pulled in. And that goes against the literal and direct way we understand that each person's vote has resulted in a 5-year term. So some governments may get an extended tenure, which they did not were not given, or that was not the understanding at this when they went to elections, and some governments may get a lesser tenure. Secondly, this goes against the concept of federalism because it impinges upon the states. Some of the states will have their tenure cut short. I don't imagine Mr. Modi's BJP or a Congress union government would necessarily cut short their tenure. Now, if a union government came and said, look, though we have 3 more years left, we are ready to cut short our tenure and have simultaneous elections, that's one thing. But I don't think that's the idea here. So the union governments want their entire tenure, but they don't mind cutting short a state government's tenure. And my last point is, I think this goes to the root of the constitutional autonomy of the Election Commission of India. As you know, Election Commission is supposed to be a neutral, independent body which has complete superintendence of elections. This is how the Constitution in Article 324 onwards envisages the role of the Election Commission. But here we see a union government sort of pitching an idea, and then it's being taken forward by a high-level committee. Admitted, there are people from different expertise, but nevertheless, it's a committee set up by the union government. And we see the Election Commission playing a very passive, silent role, whereas they should be the ones leading the discussions, which is why it reminds me a lot like how demonetization was carried out with the Reserve Bank, kept in the backdrop. So I think on that point, it's obviously something that I strongly oppose. I can understand the value it brings to the BJP, having Mr. Narendra Modi on the top of the ticket and all the states going to elections at some time. I'm sure it has its charm, but I believe it is something that goes to affecting the root of our constitutional democracy. And on Republic Day, that too, I think this is something that I feel very strongly about. But I would love to hear, what Guru also has to say on this and others from a very non-legal standpoint.
I actually have a clarifying question. I'm sorry. from what I understand, one nation, one election is not one election every 5 years. It's one election day per year. Is that right? Someone very senior in the government told me that. That is not one day every 5 years. It's one day per year.
But I can say that it's not been clarified as such.
Okay.
My understanding is that they're going back to the original sort of schedule of elections once in every 5 years. Even if it was one day in every year, which means if a government fell halfway through the year or halfway
Yeah.
from that 1 day point, then what happens for the other 6 months, right? And
So-
please don't suggest the governor, because in Tamil Nadu we have some serious issues with the governor, and I'm sure other states do as well.
No, but on that, and that's the other clarifying question. And I obviously I don't have a constitutional understanding of this, but like practically, if a government does fall in a state, can only the federal government call an election? Do we know? Does it move like parliament dissolutions or any other similar pieces that trigger an election to the federal government only?
No, I think that's an interesting question, and I've taken some of the very important note and the observations of Manu as well. But before I would like to jump in, I would invite Mitali from her experience to please elucidate and throw some light on this idea which is being discussed nationally as well. Mitali.
Guru, thank you for that. And I was thinking of a couple of things when Ruchir introduced the show. One about the fact that this is a conversation between friends, and Guru and I are actually from the same cohort in Australia India Youth Dialogue. So we were both there in 2017. So we've been respectfully agreeing to disagree for many years now and pulling each other's leg as well. And I'm glad to see that that exists. I think the other piece of criticism, or at least feedback that came to us, Ruchir, from this conversation is that what we shouldn't do is slide into becoming a channel format. He said, she said, he said, she said. So I think I want to move away from a Kahani channel key and make this our own conversation. And I really want to shine a light on the basic tenets of journalism, which is literally breaking it down to asking the 4 or 5 questions. Why? Why is this something that people are quite uncomfortable with? And I think so much of our conversation, interestingly, keeps going back to the structure of the Constitution and the structure of federalism and, what that promises or what that outlines. So I would actually invite people listening to ask the same question to themselves, examine this for yourself and question whether this does go against the basic structure of what the Constitution outlines. The other thing I would put in my W's and H's is what. Guru made the point about what this costs. Now, I'd be open to hearing from everyone, but the data that I have seems to indicate that the Election Commission themselves have indicated that this would involve from procurement to warehousing to all other costs for EVMs, as much as 10,000 crores, every 15 years. Some of the parties that have contested this have pointed out that at this point, expenses make up less than 0.02% of the union budget. And of course, when it comes to state elections, the expenses for that are covered by the state budgets themselves. I would underline that point to say economy should not and does not trump democracy. So I think that should be the most important part of it. And then there's also what do we need to change? And to my understanding, there are at least 2 or 3 amendments that we need to make in order to do that. So we need to examine whether it is that we're going to unblock what is our own founding principles. And the other is, what was the previous experience? When this was attempted as an experiment in 1967, where did it land? Did it mean that there was more efficiency, as Guru pointed to, because that's a big reason that's being, alluded to. So I have all these questions as well. And I don't want to say, I don't want to make this a statement of I feel this way and this is the only way. But I think I would also sort of encourage people listening in to literally be a part of this conversation between friends and start asking these questions as well. And I'm going to pause there because otherwise we will go way over our 1 hour and we have so much to talk about.
So just to sum up the discussion, I think Manu made some really interesting points, and this is precisely the idea behind the committee as well. Like I said, that more than 70,000 inputs and suggestions have already come. And definitely the committee would be looking forward to some more meaningful inputs and interjections. See, as to Mitali's very inquisitive points on what is going to be the model, there are suggestions, it's not out in the public domain, that if we have vote of no confidence motion, can we have a vote of confidence motion as well? So other such arrangements, other such modalities are there in conversation as well. But whether this is part of a basic structure or not, I think absolutely it will have to pass the test of judicial scrutiny. If it is violating in some essence the basic structure of the constitution, it will definitely fail the judicial scrutiny. But we have to also take a note of this fact that till 1967, what Mitali said, that elections have been very cyclical. And in terms of policy paralysis, because you see, this week, the last discussion which we had was Pran Pratishtha. Then only yesterday, a Bharat Ratna was also announced. And you see, any policy decision that the government takes is invariably linked to the elections. Now, every time there is an election, from the government point of view, how can you make a decision uh, so that it cannot be said that it is influenced by election or influenced by any sort of electoral objectives? One very interesting, during my research, I saw a Professor Louis Dillon from King's College London. So there are examples where voters tend to behave differently for addressing Manu's question when there is a state election and when there is a national election. So the argument of streamrolling the mandate is something which is very different, because in 2014 and 2019 we saw Andhra Pradesh, for that matter, Odisha for that matter, they had a different preference in terms of national government and a different preference in terms of state government as well. As to the modalities, the four W's and one H, I think the conversation is open, the discussion is out in the public domain. We will definitely see some concrete, doable mechanism coming out of that dialogue.
Thanks, Guru. I'm going to jump in now. And this is something that I think all of us agree on. We are all avid travelers. We love, getting on a flight. My wife's famous saying is that traveling economy on a flight without children is like traveling business class, right? And we all love traveling. But why is it so hard, in India? And this is, I hope, people like Ruchir and Mitali living abroad, I hope you also go through some terrible airport experiences like Guru and I do, trying to get a flight out of T1 in Chennai or T3 in Delhi. See, yeah, we understand there's fog in Delhi. That's not Delhi's problem, right? But then over the last 3 months, this is really sort of, I think, caught everyone on Twitter on fire. One, is this something to do with the fact that we have a acute shortage of pilots? Is it a manpower issue? Two, are there too many cases? In the case of Jet Airways, at least, there's a lot of litigation, which is, in a sense, throttle them financially, and they're not able to actually, get back on their feet. And once their flights have been bought, they've not really taken off. Or three, is this an infrastructure / regulatory issue that, the entire country, the Director General of Civil Aviation, or all key stakeholders, including industry, must really catch by the scruff of the collar and say, look, we've got it all wrong. We've oversold tickets when we don't have enough flights or enough pilots, or our pilots are not getting enough breaks in between flights. What is this? I mean, I'm gonna throw the ball first to Ruchir, because he's taken, I think, a 20-hour flight yesterday. Notwithstanding how comfortable that journey was, Ruchir, what's the problem with traveling by air these days?
But you better not have flown business class and then we've engineered.
No, I experienced, I also do a lot of work in Africa, and I've spent like a full day in the airport. So it's not an India only problem. But I will say this. The thing that bothered me the most was Delhi has one category 3 runway, and it's been under repair since September. I mean, like, forget runways. Even with the roads, we decide to start work just before rain. Like, why can't we just plan a little bit better? That's at the crux of it. Delhi has a fog situation every December, every January. If you can't finish the work, let's not start it for the one runway that can work in low visibility. That's sort of my main point. the air traffic growth, airlines consolidating, Air India privatized, all of that is going to have an intense amount of pressure on airlines to resource properly. And I think, I mean, obviously, as the middle class rises, more people fly in airplanes, the demand increases. This is going to not get easier. We definitely need more pilots. We actually need more affordable pilot training. But generally speaking, I think as a country, we really need to think about how do we keep up with the amount of demand that's coming our way. It's not going to get lesser.
I'm going to deflect to Mitali now, but before I do that, Mitali, just please help me understand this, right?
Yeah.
20 years ago, this was touted to be the next, the most exciting, sexy sector where people, with big money went, right? We've seen Kingfisher, Paramount, Jet Airways, SpiceJet, Go First. From at least the top of my mind, I can think of these 5 or 6 big airline companies all got hit, bankruptcy, litigation. Financially, is it just sucking too much money out and we are not able to sort of give enough returns, or is there something more fundamentally that I'm not understanding?
So I will say this, Manu, right at the start. I mean, globally, aviation is a loss-making business. It doesn't do well. That's the hard truth. Post-COVID, airline fares have actually gone up many-fold. So, some of these airlines are trying to recover from all the money that they lost. But I think it's partly to do with a really flawed model and in part to do with what are really, really high fuel costs. I mean, ATF prices are prohibitively expensive, especially for companies functioning in India. Added to that, the fact that they sort of saddle on a lot of debt, which means that the business itself becomes problematic. So I won't say that India is unique, but I think India stands out for the number of examples that you pointed out. Now, on the point of the airlines themselves, Manu, the joke goes, well, at least the trains run on time. Now, unfortunately, this is sort of an equitable situation in India where roads, trains, airlines, everything is lock jammed. You both made the point about pilots, and I think that's a really important point to make, because what's happened is that we've now shifted targets to 2030, where we are, ordering a lot of fresh fleet in, and, there's going to be many more aeroplanes. Now, to fly these, you need close to 11,000 pilots by 2030. If you break that down, that's about 1,600 pilots every year. Again, I would say if you were to go back and see how many commercial pilot licenses we've been giving out, we're not hitting that number. Pilots are overworked. And the bigger problem I have is actually, stripped of the economics of it, Manu, and stripped of the the infrastructural problems, as you mentioned. It's the dehumanizing process in this. As Ruchir said, these are not examples unique to Indian airports. But I wonder if we have videos from across the world of a passenger sitting through the entire flight in the washroom where the door is jammed, or people sitting on the tarmac eating food, or passengers trapped inside the aerobridge. This is dehumanizing, And then when you sort of encourage people to say, okay, Indigo sends a message saying, please arrive 3.5 hours before a domestic flight. It is complete abuse of people's time. You can't do that. And I will sort of also say, and I'm not making a political slant, but while thinking about what to talk about in our conversation, I actually went on the Civil Aviation Minister's Twitter timeline to see what it is that he had to share about, changes or how they're looking into things. I kid you not, I was scrolling for a long time and I found nothing. I found one exchange with Shashi Tharoor about esoteric words and the dictionary and many armchair arguments. I didn't find a cogent argument or a cogent explanation or even an honest apology saying this is not okay. This is not how people, who are spending their money and the middle class is spending their money and taking a flight should travel. And I think that's what we really need to think about. But let me sort of hand the baton back to you, Manu, because I know we haven't got Guru's thoughts in.
No, I want Guru's thoughts on this. Guru, I think you and I agree that, the first impression that a person gets of a city or a country is the airport, right? And sometimes, again, I don't think Chennai is that much better or different from any other airport in India. And I think often we find that experience itself is lacking. I mean, and that's where we have to improve. And Guru, I want you to maybe help us understand one part. There has been a move towards privatizing airports, right? We've been giving it to private operators, and there's good and bad. And what's your view on that also, in addition to what you think about we can do to improve airline infrastructure, pilots availability, and all of the things that are sort of really pulling the sector down?
Well, I think, Manu, it's very important, and this sector is something that touches all our lives invariably. But I would like to take the last point that you made, Manu, about privatization. I think Delhi airport, particularly the GMR airport, it was a long, I think more than 10 years ago, it was privatized. So privatization of airport or any other infrastructure has been on the anvil since the last 20-25 years. As far as the air infrastructure is concerned, I think we have to keep in mind that definitely the fog condition was really messy, and some of us traveling in India would definitely have had a difficult experience during the travel. But we also cannot discount the fact that some of the key schemes like Ure Desh Ka Aam Nagrik, how flying, the experience of flying has been democratized in a way. Mitali rightly pointed out that the cost of flying post-COVID have definitely gone up, but we are also witnessing a massive surge in the number of passengers, particularly the airline passengers. Infrastructure, the work is being done. I think yes and no. Yes, because I think 74 airports in 70 years and then 74 airports in 9 years. I think that is something which is a very telling experience. With respect to runways, which Ruchir pointed out, that do we need more, it's called category 3 or category 4 runways where sufficient amount of fog lighting is there. I think Delhi airport is in the process of developing it. And Manu makes a very interesting point on the experience of the airport. The Bengaluru new airport terminal, Manu, I don't know whether you've been there or not. It is a completely different experience. And I've done a bit of traveling myself. Even when T3 came into existence, much before, T3 was an experience back then. T2 in Mumbai was an experience back then. Today, as per the global or international standards, it can be said that it is offering a different experience. We definitely need infrastructure because the city to which I belong, Patna Airport, I think the infrastructure is still 40-50 years old. Only in my recent memory, it used to have only 4 gates, no lounge, no parking. So, like, and 25 years ago, people used to go till the runway as well to say bye to the passengers. So, I think it's a work in progress. Weather definitely is a challenge, but in terms of number of airports, in terms of runways, the new Jewar International Airport will have the capacity of major international flying network as well. So I think yes and no. Is the pace sufficient? Obviously, we need to increase the pace, but the work in terms of number of airports, in terms of infrastructure, has been phenomenal in the last few years.
No doubt.
I just
agree. Sorry, go on.
I want to make a regulatory point, which is that a little while ago, I want to say at least maybe 7 to 10 years ago, DGCA came out because there was this airline pressure of how many airlines were late and there was no compensation, no food, etc. And that regulation changed how responsibly airlines took passengers quite a bit. Like I received notifications. There's a real sense of responsibility around being on time. The thing is, so many of the airports have been privatized, but the pressure is not necessarily on airports. The fact that the primary runway that operates under foggy conditions is under construction, none of us, there are videos of people talking about Indigo, but no one is really talking about the Delhi airport being a problem, right? I think the authority should take action against airports not taking responsibility of the situation either. I think that is something that can be better, because we don't need the airports being a problem in this situation.
Thank you, guys. There's a couple of interesting points, but again, to come back to one particular thing, end of the day, the experience of flying is still it's a customer service heavy industry, right? The point I want to pick up on here is Mitali's, right, where she said some of these experiences seem dehumanizing, and it's how they're treated, right? You're supposed to feel very welcomed on a flight and in an airport, but I've never ever seen in all my years of flying a single immigration officer in India ever smile. So I think that's something we should all ask why nobody wants to say welcome to India, right? And or have a little chat with somebody who's coming in, but hopefully.
And the fact that they're not doing it with someone as charming as you, Manu, I mean, like, what is the immigration officer thinking? Not done, not done.
No, but I think that's interesting point. But I think our airports really got a boost up when we hosted G20. And with G20 happening in more than 110 cities, airports were the real drivers, real vehicles to actually sustain the events of G20. So, yeah, I think obviously the manpower side and the infrastructure side, it is in a need of constant upgradation.
Okay,
Over
Manu,
to Mitali for a topic that will have no opponents.
And I was going to say that the next time we take a flight, I think maybe we'll all sort of put on a G20 tag, and that might work better for us. I'm going to switch to climate. And yeah, I agree with you, Manu. I think over here it's not something that there's a this side and a that side on. And within climate, I think specifically what we want to talk about is one of the schemes that was announced earlier this week, which was from the Prime Minister. It's called the Pradhan Mantri Suryodaya Yojana, which is basically installing on residential rooftops of 1 crore houses a solar setup, essentially. Ruchir, let me start with you, because I know you're sort of deeply invested in this project, both, I mean, in terms of your area of interest and otherwise. My understanding is that a scheme already existed. What is your sense, first of all, of whether 1 crore households is doing enough? And I think the other thing is that, look, the reality is that these schemes are very important, but I think at points in time, they have to be status checks. At this point, India's solar power program, as I understand it, is running behind schedule. But I think you would have a better sense of, how fast we are moving and what more needs to be done.
Yeah, thanks, Mitali. I think this is a complex subject, so give me some time. I want to lay the cards in terms of what the problems are. One of the main sources of greenhouse emissions is energy, electricity generation, coal, oil, gas. One of the biggest problems India has is it imports a very large amount of energy, be it coal or oil. For India to transition to net zero or net negative, transitioning to renewables has to be a very big part of its energy mix. At a grid level, at a very large scale, that transition has to happen not only across different states, but at grid levels, and grids need to learn how to manage it. Now, here is the complexity. In India, most of the grids are bankrupt. In fact, one of the big COVID packages that came out after COVID was to the government. The federal government gave a lot of the grids a significant amount of money to help them reduce their debts. But it's not made a huge difference that these government-run grids. A big problem is a lot of them they're corrupt at many different levels. And so what ends up happening is the incentives to accelerate transition to renewables sometimes are not aligned with either the revenue of the grid or the respective officers in some of these grids. What does that mean? That means that at a federal level, the government has been setting all these targets, including 40 gigawatts for solar, rooftop solar by 2021. They were able to achieve 7. And that's not because they did not have incentives or ambition or targets. It's because incentives have not been aligned until now. Some state governments had subsidies, like Gujarat had them for residential solar. So if you install solar on your rooftop for your house, you would get a fixed subsidy from the state government, and that drove a lot of adoption. If you go in Ahmedabad, you will see solar on so many home rooftops. So this 1 crore policy, 1 crore rooftop residential policy is a good idea. We have to wait for the rules in terms of how the funding rolls out, who will be eligible, will there be misuse of funds, and so on and so forth. So we'll have to wait. Overall, we need to reduce our imports of fuel and coal and increase more electricity. There is another problem as well that comes with this, which is balancing the grid. Without going into the physics of it, the amount of electricity that goes on the grid has to come off the grid. And when the sun is shining bright between 11 and 2 o'clock, if you have a lot of solar, that solar has to be used. The power has to be used. And solar solves for the 11 to 2, but peak consumption in most places is between 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So then how do we store all of this extra generation that comes online? And again, because these grids they don't talk to each other, even though we have one national connected grid, because the distribution companies are all separate. That, I don't think that's a problem right away, but as you get more solar on board, that starts becoming a problem too. This is a complex issue, and the policy is more than welcome. Let's see how the details pan out. But it's not going to result in like us solving climate change. It's a small step.
Yeah, let me get Guru in, and then I want to sort of have Manu have the space to close this conversation up. Guru, the center currently already has a national rooftop scheme. So, tell us a little bit more in terms of what your understanding is on how this is different, on what the challenges are in terms of meeting those targets that Ruchir talked about, and really what the thinking is on resolving as he pointed out, one is the rooftop scheme, but there's so many steps behind that need to be unbundled, and they're large knots, not small ones.
No, I think Ruchir said that it's a complex issue, but at the same time, installing 1 crore solar rooftop at like one residences, I think it's something which is very ambitious and something which is very aspirational as well at the same time. But similar experiment, similar policy has been initiated by the US, for example, in the 1990s, where they announced they will have rooftop solar system on 1 million houses. They completed it, but in 20 years, 2 decades it took for them. Back in 1990, it was definitely a challenge. But today, I think this is something which is very doable, because we have if I'm not mistaken, Ruchir can correct me, that the largest solar park in the world at Motera in Gujarat. And we are also leading the International Solar Alliance with France, if I'm not mistaken. So in terms of certain observations by Council on Energy, Environment and Water as well, has definitely advocated that more and more residential buildings are untapped resources which can be used for solar power generation. And it is, in a way, in a sense, a pursuance of our commitment that by 2030, we will have 50% of installed capacity of electricity generation from non-fossil fuel based energy sources, of which I think 43% is already achieved. But definitely it's ambitious, but we have done well, because I was just going through this data, which I can show that top 10 states with highest rooftop solar capacity. It's an excellent article. It came in today's Express, and it outlines that how Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Rajasthan, although not at the optimum level, but we are on the path of it. And I think 73.3 gigawatt of 100 gigawatt has already been achieved through the medium of solar power. With Motera, with International Solar Alliance, and with this ambitious plan, I think this is not undoable. This is something which can be achieved if we follow it up and uh, persevere with the scheme's details, which are yet to come. We're looking forward to it.
One comment on the thing
Yeah.
that is really attractive is economics drives adoption, and that's true for almost everything. And because the solar price is already cheaper than your grid power, it's already at a good place. The problem is the upfront cost is quite high. So reducing that makes sense. So that's why we wait and watch for the rules. Sorry, Manu.
Let me preface this whole theme by saying that we speak so much around politics, I mean, four of us and people around us, that I think we must also acknowledge all the good work that governments are doing in the space of climate change, right? Because it's the most non-vote bank issue that can be, right? Because even the climate activists are much smaller in India, compared to other issue-based activism. So I think it's fantastic, great sort of, I think, thrust over the last maybe 5, 10, 15 years. I'm not someone who's very well versed with this, but I can definitely see that a lot of efforts being taken. Solar, fantastic. I know how much is being sort of done in that. But of course, what I would say is now we need to think bit more broader. We have to say, okay, what else, right? So in Tamil Nadu, we are the highest generator of wind energy. So that is something that you see in southern parts of Tamil Nadu. We are late adopters, but we are quite big on solar now, and that's going to improve. And I agree, with the right subsidies, you can make almost they can be solar everywhere. There's been a huge push in terms of energy transition in Tamil Nadu to electric vehicles. We are trying to project the state as a big electric vehicle manufacturing hub. We believe that's going to be the future. I mean, Tesla and other big guns notwithstanding, I think there's a lot of scope in that as well. All our autos are becoming electric, two-wheeler bikes, motorbikes are becoming electric, and so on. There's also an overall comprehensive Tamil Nadu climate change mission, which was started a few years ago, which looks at all different aspects. And I think finally, even within my own field in law, people are starting to talk about climate justice, right? And whether there can be, this is moving beyond environmental justice. Now, environmental justice is the idea that our environment must be protected. So, right from the Bhopal case to, all the other cases where there's pollution of rivers, water bodies, air, etc., and the setting up of the green benches of the National Green Tribunal. Now we have actually a concept of climate justice, understanding how climate-related events, climate change are affecting people. We are now looking at climate refugees, right? From war and persecution, we are now looking at whether climate change will create, hundreds of thousands of refugees in the next 5-10 years. I think it's great that we've been able to spend a little bit of time on this issue, but I'd love to sort of engage on a greater detail in the days to come, because I think this is something that we will need to spend a lot more time thinking, and also more importantly, talking quite widely. Ruchir, I believe you have something exciting to share towards the end that you've come across. Do you want to
Manu, before Ruchir does that, I want to sort of really champion what you're saying, and I agree with it completely. And I think this is one subject where we need to zoom out from, a government to the global stage and what's happening there, because I think that's the conversation. I'm so glad that in COP, for the first time, fossil fuel companies were discussed and called out. I'm so glad that there is a climate justice fund, as you said. In fact, the man who started it, Professor Salim ul Haq, actually once said that it should be called the Climate Injustice Fund and not the Justice Fund. And I think it's fantastic, that we're having these conversations, because really we've got one shot, and we need to make it work.
Speaking of solar, I think it's very dear to our hearts, especially in this part of the world where we worship sun in the festival of Chhat. Chhat is basically the sun worshipping festival, which is, I think, has acquired global dimensions now. So there is a cultural and civilizational angle to it as well. And Manu has made a very interesting point on climate justice. Culturally and civilizationally, I think we have not been consumer-centric society, but a society which has been has had a very amicable relationship with the nature as well. And recently, I think one of the great example is Elephant Whisperers that won the Academy Awards as well. It in a sense shows us the connection that we have with the nature. So
On that, one of the things we want to try out, because obviously we discuss so much politics and current affairs that sometimes things can get really heated. So the last few minutes, we open this for a new segment called Aapne Suna Kya. Until we come up with a better name, that's the name. Have you heard? Are there stories that you've come across this week that you want to share? It might even be something personal that you're connected to or not. Aapne Suna Kya is an opportunity for us to just share something that we're excited about with the audience. Why don't I start with Mitali? Anything on your mind?
I want to talk about somebody who I think is a doyen in the world of Indian classical music, who we most unfortunately lost this year, Ustad Rashid Khan, who passed away in Calcutta earlier in January. I think, first of all, it's such a phenomenal story of a man who devoted his life to the music, who actually learned under scholars like Pandit Sunil Bose and Pandit Ajoy Chakraborty. I will say I was sort of a reluctant admirer, and I don't really get Indian classical music, and I am nowhere near an expert. So it was introduced. He was introduced, and his music was introduced to me by my husband, and I'm really grateful for having gotten to hear him live. Over the weekend or whenever you have time, I recommend listening to something called Rag Hamir. I'm taking the liberty of just sharing a link because I know we're video and audio, so please try and hear it. It's so beautiful and it's so meditative, and it's so much of what I believe is the syncretism of my country. And on Republic Day, I'm allowed to get a little bit emotional and patriotic. That I think it's a beautiful listen, and it's a beautiful tribute to what we've always been, which is an amalgamation of many, and the product is this beautiful whole. So that's mine.
Manu?
Shall I start with you?
Yeah, so what's been on my mind is Malayalam cinema. I mean, I don't know how many of you are deeply exposed to this, but recently I've been watching a few more movies than I should. And one of the movies that really, really made a deep impression, and I would, I would really request you all to take an hour and a half to watch it. It's called Kadal, the Core. It's available on Amazon Prime as of January this year. Malayalam movies are very simple, like, family oriented, very easy to watch, but yet very pleasing on the eye, and easy to understand, and so well portrayed, the characters. This particular movie has in its center, without giving away too much, a very sort of everyday family set in a village in Kerala, where there is also a slight interplay of politics, but you sort of wonder what's happening between the husband and the wife, why there is so little sort of engagement and intimacy and love. And then there is the entire sort of concept of sexuality, sexual orientation is sort of weaved around that. And you understand really, without thinking too much, how sexual orientation and aspects of sexuality will make such a big impact on everyday lives of people. And this is something that we've engaged with it on a legal or an academic level. Of course, we had the Supreme Court case last year around same-sex or marriages, or what's called marriage equality, but this is fantastic, called Kadal, the Core. And of course, shout out from here to Malayalam cinema in general as well.
I have a list of movies to watch on my slides, which are all Malayalam Tamil, because I don't have direct exposure. So I look for these movies. So now it's going on that list.
Who's
Guru?
next? Who's next?
Yeah, I
Guru.
think what's been on my mind is it's very difficult. After a point of time, it's very difficult to separate personal and political. So I think one thing that has been on my mind is the announcement of Bharat Ratna that happened yesterday. I can be accused of being political, but I think since this Bharat Ratna is from Bihar, and the man who has risen from the most humble origins, I think it's been deeply inspirational. So Karpuri Thakur, when for the first time he became the chief minister, so he comes from Nai community. I'll give you a context. He comes from the barber community, and the Nai community, they use this razor. It's called Astura in Hindi. So when for the first time he became the chief minister of Bihar, the sort of slogans that were raised against him, and one thing that has kept me inspired was against him, it was Karpuri Karpura Chhod Kursi Pakad Astura. Since you come from Nai community, go back to your profession, go back and hold that razor. You are not, you cannot be made to sit on the chair of a chief minister. And that man was so ahead of his times. He was the first person. He belonged to Lokdal, non-Congress, non-Jansangh, non-BJP. Back then, the movement was such. So he was the first person in the history of our politics to make way for women reservation, to make way for economically weaker section among the upper caste as well. So his acknowledgement, his realization as Bharat Ratna is something that has kept me on my emotional move since the announcement. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm following the tennis, the Australian Open's on. Rohan Bopanna made it to semi-finals. He's world number 1 in doubles. I thought that was pretty amazing. Also, at the beginning of the tournament, I think Sumit Nagal beat a seeded player after like 30 years or something. An Indian, yeah. So good Australian Open. And I think of Rohan Bopanna as very young. What I didn't realize is 43 because he was young when I was growing up. Yeah, that was great news.
Ruchir,
Anyway,
you founded Australia India Youth Dialogue for under 40. 43 is not old.
that's well in sports. I take that back. But I just meant in sports. So please tell us what you think of this episode. What do you think of this new segment? This is the end of our second episode, and we really want to hear from you on how we can do this better. We're early in our journey, and I'm sure we have a lot to learn as well. But I hope we are valuing your time and you're getting something out of these conversations. If you'd like to email us, you can do that at indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com or find any of us on X, TID_podcast on X.com, India Dialogue Podcast on YouTube. Guru is at iGuru Prakash, Manu is at Manuraj1983, Mitali on Mitali Live, and I'm on Ruchir_P, all of us on X.com, formerly Twitter. We look forward to seeing you all again in a week. Thank you. Bye.